We're now ready for Unit 4. I believe Unit 4 is our last unit in this first book when it comes to sixth grade. But as we get into Unit 4, it's going to be pretty easy at first. It's a lot of information that you've already seen for many years and that you probably understand and already know. But maybe there's a couple of things that I can explain to you to where you understand it a little bit better, or maybe I fill in a couple of gaps that you missed when you were younger. So first thing we're going to look at is what an integer is, and then we're how we represent integers either with digits or on a number line, or maybe both. As we get into this, then we want to begin once again with our I can statement. What is it that it wants me to learn in this lesson? Right? So it says that I can use positive and negative numbers as well as zero to represent quantities. Now that seems worded a little weird, don't you think? It says as well as zero. Well, what's wrong with zero? Zero didn't do anything to anyone. Well, one of the notes I would like you to write down is that zero, the number zero, is not an integer. Now I'll explain that as we go along, so hopefully you understand exactly what an integer is. But when it comes to integers, we need to understand, well, why is zero not an integer? And it really comes down to the idea of when I count. Do I use a zero when I'm counting or not? Now, it's not talking that it's zero isn't a digit inside of a number, such as the number 100. It has two zeros in it, right? So those are digits holding place value. What we're talking about is when I actually count things out. So let's say that I'm going to order a sheet of stickers and I want to count how many stickers I have. Do I start by counting zero? No, right? I skip zero. I just count with what I have as I start counting. One, two, three. These are the things that I have. And I go all the way down until I know exactly how many stickers I have. Now, we don't always think about it, but these are positive numbers because these are the things that I have. They're in my possession or that I'm gaining. In the same way, if I'm playing the game Monopoly and I know I owe the bank a certain amount of money, and the banker's holding their hand out because they're greedy and they want you to give them their money, when you start counting it out, do you first say zero? No, because we don't count that way, right? So I just start counting. Here's one, here's two, here's three. Now, those numbers would be represented as negative numbers because it's what I used to have, but now I'm giving it up, right? So those would be a negative number, and I don't necessarily count negative one, negative two, negative three, right? But I understand when I'm counting that it's leaving my possession. So when it comes to counting, this is another note that I would like you to add. Integers are all of the positive and negative counting numbers. I don't start counting with zero, therefore zero is not an integer. Now that doesn't mean that it's not a number, and we'll get into it once again here in just a moment, but understanding exactly what it's wanting me to know then is recognizing that the zero on these number lines is a different color than they are for the other numbers. So notice that the zeros are black because they're not actually integers, right? The negatives are in orange in this case, and the positives are in blue in this case. But we could see that we have three distinct colors because they're different sets. But when we look at our number line, because that's the second part of the I can statement, I can use positive and negative numbers as well as zero to represent quantities, and the same way that I can also use number lines. And those number lines are going to look in two different forms. We have a horizontal number line and we have a vertical number line. Now, horizontal just simply means that it goes across, right? And then vertical just means it's going up and down. And some of you automatically know that, and some of you don't, right? So you might make those notes, and I apologize that my image is covering up the and down for the vertical. I didn't think it would be that big. But horizontal is going across. So one of the ways you can always remember horizontal, if you think about looking out at the horizon, which they both have the same root word, horizon and horizontal, what we're talking about is seeing the land line going straight across, right? So the sun is setting in the horizon across the line that the land looks in the distance. Vertical is made with two lines that basically go up and down. Now, not straight up and down, and I get that, but hopefully it might help you remember what vertical and horizontal means. Horizontal, like the horizon, goes straight across. Vertical, like the V lines, go up and down. When I look, therefore, at a number line, then I just want to be able to identify the information that it's giving me, right? So to one side, we're going to have negative integers, and a negative integer is just simply less than 0, right? On the other side, then I have positive integers, and positive integers are simply more than 0, where the 0 is neither negative or positive. Now, just because it's not negative or positive doesn't mean that it takes any of its identity away on what it does, right? So I had a conversation the last week of school, and someone had gotten confused between positive and negative and odds and evens, and I don't want you to get confused on that. 0 is an even number. When I talk about my evens, I have 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. So anytime my number ends with a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8, then I know the whole entire number is going to be even. However, it's not an integer. It is not a counting number. Once again, I don't start counting the things that I have by saying 0 first, or by giving something away by saying 0 first. So that's the only difference. So then we start talking about representation. How can we show it, right? So we have this little situation that they talk about and says, suppose Annabeth is traveling to different parts of the country. She logs the temperature in each location. When Annabeth was in Miami, Florida, the temperature was 80 degrees. Same week, she traveled to Caribou, Maine, where it was negative 10 degrees. How can Annabeth represent the positive and negative values in her temperature log? Well, when it talks about 80 degrees, right, it doesn't say it's positive or negative. So we have what we call an assumed positive. If it gives us a number, if it gives us a value, and it doesn't indicate this is positive or this is negative, then we just assume it's positive. So I would write it down as a positive 80. When it gives me my negative temperature in Caribou, Maine, well, it already shows me the negative number. So all I would have to do is just say, well, I would write it down as negative 10. So just including that positive and negative sign, that makes it an integer. So normally we're used to writing our positive numbers without the positive sign, but on these lessons, since it is about integers, please make sure you include that positive sign. Negatives definitely need the negative sign. So now we need to look at situations, real life situations, and be able to write integers, but also be able to tell what that 0 would represent. Now, please don't let your mind go all kind of crazy when it comes to what would 0 represent. Many sixth graders over the past several years have made this much more complicated when it comes to that 0 than it ever needs to be. Let's look at what it's talking about. So in this particular example, they talk about a football play, right? A football team has a 10-yard loss in one play. The first thing it asks me to do is to write an integer that represents the situation. The second thing it asks me to do is to explain the meaning of 0 in the situation. Well, usually the first part is the easy part for most sixth graders, and then the second part, they're like, I have no idea, it's too confusing. I promise it's not. So the first one is I need to look at the situation that's talking about. The football team has a 10-yard loss in one play. So loss should indicate to me that it's going to be a negative number, right? So in this particular situation, the play goes into action. Someone is tackled behind the line. Maybe the quarterback is sacked, but they lose 10 yards. Therefore, it's a negative 10. Now, what would 0 represent? Now, don't make this complicated. 0 represents the fact that something happened and maybe they were tackled at the line of scrimmage. The center fumbled the ball and recovered it, but the ball didn't move. That's what the 0 represents. So in a football play, the integer 0 represents no yards gained or lost. That's all it means by what would 0 represent. Don't make it complicated. So I want you to try this one in a situation when it comes to the elevation of Death Valley. says the elevation of Death Valley National Park is the lowest in North America at 282 below sea level. Write an integer to represent the situation and explain the meaning of 0 in this situation. Let's go ahead and pause the video, try both parts, come back to me when you have an answer. So hopefully you thought about what was being asked and you thought, well, this is actually pretty easy. All right, represent an integer or write an integer that represents the situation. So the first thing I do is I look at what was being said. Well, I can see that it's 282 feet below sea level. So below would have to indicate to me once again that that's going to be a negative number. Now I'll give you a visual that hopefully will let you see exactly what this is talking about, because the terminology of sea level is not something that all sixth graders are familiar with. Right. So the idea of sea level is the fact that here is where the sea is, and then we compare that to the land masses, because some land is at sea level, some is above, such as Mount Whitney, and some are below, such as Death Valley. Right. So if I'm going to write an integer that represents the situation, and I know it's below sea level, then I'd say, well, that's going to be negative 282. When I'm explaining what the 0 would represent, then that means that I'm at sea level, right? I'm not going above it. I'm not going below it. So I'm just kind of standing there, not going in either direction. So 0 would mean that we are at sea level, either above or below. Don't make it complicated, because it's not. It just means that this is what we're talking about, and it's going to stay the same. All right, so then we get into our next step, which is actually graphing. Now, once again, you guys have done this for the past couple of years. I don't think this is difficult for anyone, just reviewing what it is that we're getting ready to do, because we're going to be jumping by leaps and bounds from this beginning information. So they color code the integer set, and so I'm going to color code the integer set also. And basically all it tells you is that when I'm going to plot numbers or integers on a number line, I'm just going to put a circle, all right? I want to fill it in, so we call it a dot. So when I look at the 2, notice there's not a positive or a negative sign, so I know that it's an understood positive. So I'm going to put a circle or a dot on the positive 2. My next one is a negative 3. So I'm going to go to the 0, and now I'm going to work backwards, and I'm going to go 3 steps. That's where I'm going to put my dot for negative 3. 0 is right there in the middle, right? So I'm just going to put a dot at the 0. Not complicated, not difficult. Now, if it was on a vertical line, then I still have to do the same thing, just understanding I'm going to go up for positive and down for negative. So if I went in that order, then on the positive 2, I know I'm going to go up 2 from the 0. And for the negative 3, I'm going to go down 3 steps from the 0. And then the 0 is right in the middle, right? Once again, not difficult and not meant to be. If I do the same thing with this example set, then I have negative 4, positive 2, because there's no sign, therefore I understand it's a positive, and a negative 1. So I put in my negative 4, I put in my positive 2, which is going to be on the right-hand side of the 0, and then my negative 1 is 1 step behind the 0. All right, let's check and make sure that you know how to do it. Plot the 3 that are given, and then come back and check. So hopefully, once again, you thought, wow, this is easy. Let's get on to the assignment. Let's just make sure that we did it correctly, right? So we have 1 negative, 1 positive, and then 1 that is neither positive or negative. So my negative 3, I'm going to go 3 to the left of the 0. And for my positive 1, I'm going to go forward 1 from the 0. And then on the 0 is where I'm going to put my 3rd dot. Make sure that you have plotted all 3 of those numbers correctly on your number line. All right, that's all there is to the lesson. Less than 15 minutes. You're going to do the evens, 2 through 20, basically, but 2 through 14 on page 197. And then the last 3 evens, 16, 18, and 20 on page 198. Then go ahead and work on your ALEKS or some other assignment that you have. And if you have any questions, all you have to do is ask.